Is there anything more familiar than the sight of the moon shining at night? Humans have written about its beauty for millennia. Despite the artificial glow of streetlights, if someone asked you to name something that could be found in the night sky, chances are the moon would come to mind first. And that makes sense, given that the moon has lit our nighttime paths since the dawn of humanity. That's what conventional science and ancient literature would have us believe. But some of us don't buy into that line of thinking. Instead, some believe that the moon hasn't been around for as long as we'd like to think because the moon isn't really a moon. It's a hollow structure fabricated by extraterrestrials, possibly as an observatory or spaceship. If you've never heard of this theory, called either the hollow moon theory or spaceship moon theory, you might think this is a new conspiracy theory that started on Reddit, but in that you'd be mistaken. Surprisingly, this theory was birthed into popular culture by none other than the great science fiction master H.G. Wells in his 1901 book, The First Men in the Moon. Thereafter, it was mentioned in the Russian periodical Sputnik in 1970 as a scientific take on why the moon isn't as dense as the Earth. From there, the hollow moon theory has gone on to become a popular science fiction trope. But none of these publications are what made the hollow moon theory seem plausible to most of us here in the West. That was actually done by NASA itself. The following is a snippet of an Apollo 12 mission recollection stated by Pete Conrad, the mission's captain, and retold by two of his fellow shipmates, as displayed on NASA's historical website. A lunar orbit to cover the sites better, and we also elected to stay an extra day in lunar orbit so that we could complete the work without feeling pressured. We took hundreds of stills and thousands of feet of motion picture film of the Fra Mauro site and of the Descartes and Lalande craters, two other proposed landing sites. Meantime, the experiments we had left on the lunar surface were busy recording and transmitting data. They all worked well with one exception and were really producing useful data. One unexpected result came from the seismic experiment recording the impact of Intrepid on the surface after we had jettisoned it. The entire moon rang like a gong, vibrating and resonating for almost an hour after the impact. The best guess was that the moon was composed of a rubble a lot deeper below its surface than anybody had assumed. The internal structure, being fractured instead of a solid mass, could bounce the seismic energy from piece to piece for quite a while. The same phenomenon was observed at two ALSEP stations when the Apollo 14 crew jettisoned their lunar module Antares and programmed it to crash between the Apollo 12 and 14 sites. With every mission after Apollo 12, additional seismic calibrations were obtained by aiming the Saturn SIVB stage to impact a selected point on the moon after separation from the spacecraft. The seismic vibrations from these impacts lasted about 3 hours. As soon as NASA was reported as saying the moon had rang like a gong when struck, many Americans understood this to mean that the moon could, in fact, be hollow. On the surface, it makes sense. A ringing sound would seem to come from something hollow, and nobody alive today would know for sure how the moon became the moon. Could it have been built? Could it be a spaceship or observatory? We'll discuss it now on Sage, Skeptic, and Storyteller. Thanks for joining us at Triple S Podcast. I'm Jen.
I'm Ellen.
And I'm Annette.
And we're coming at you today with the hollow moon theory, otherwise called the spaceship moon theory, which some people just love this theory. I love this theory as a story because, oh my God, what is more interesting than taking something that you see every single day and making it into something that could be new and possibly even menacing? I mean, the moon as a spaceship or a hollow structure, amazing from a storytelling point of view.
Oh,
awesome.
Absolutely. It's something that everyone knows what it is, or we think we know what it is anyway, from when you're a little kid, you learn about the moon and it just seems so innocent sitting up there in the sky.
Yeah, it's a friendly little light at night. A lot of people worship it. Many different spiritualities throughout history it plays such an integral role in the Earth's functions. And, we're even taught that our monthly cycles are because of the moon, So
Yeah, it
it's,
affects the tides of the ocean, and
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So is it hollow?
No. Yeah. I love to hate this conspiracy theory because it kicks me in the proverbial balls.
Oh, you mean
Like,
hard to disprove?
no, it's so easy to disprove. And like just the fact that people believe this for me is just like,
Okay, what's worse, believing in flat Earth or hollow moon?
oh, that's
Oh,
hard. I
definitely
would say flat earth.
flat
I would
Earth.
say flat Earth too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Okay,
flat
yeah.
Earth for
So this is
sure.
Yeah,
slightly
I
less
don't.
crazy.
Yeah, because with flat earth, I don't even know how you logically process that idea. Like,
Yeah, I don't fully
Hmm.
understand that one either. Do they think the moon is flat too? Do they think all these other planets and things we can see in the sky that look, like spherical in nature, do they think those are flat too? Or we need to
I
dive
don't
into that
know,
one.
but like I saw this great illustration of the earth being flat and then a lamp over it that just like lit the whole earth because it was flat. And I was like, yes,
Yeah.
there you go. Like,
But
have
then
these people
wouldn't
never
it always
been in an
be like,
airplane?
maybe not?
I don't know.
I mean, with the
We need
price
to
of
dive into
airline
that one. Yeah.
I
Because
mean,
like,
with the price of airline tickets,
But
imagine that, you are not wealthy enough to afford airline tickets, so you never get on a plane in your lifetime, and you grow to an adult and you're like, "Hey, I heard that the earth is flat and that sounds plausible." And since you don't really think about it any further than that, you're not like, "But wait, how do we have different times of day where the shadows move around and everything like that?" Like, you know,
I'm sure that theory has many explanations for those
I'm sure it
things.
does.
yeah.
But the
But the
hollow moon, by
moon.
comparison, is way, way easier to believe because everybody
Yeah.
knows that the moon is cheese and it's full of holes.
Oh, right. And but there is a lot of unknown. There's more unknowns about the moon than there is about Earth. And there is, because of that quote from the intro that you so beautifully used, because NASA said it rang like a bell, and they've measured these moonquakes, and it does ring like a bell.
Mhm.
Is that weird?
Hmm.
Does that mean it's hollow? No. It actually gives us more understanding of what the moon is actually composed of, and, the actual nature of the moon. So, to stretch it to say that it's hollow is, yeah, that's a leap to make. But uh
Well, according
There's
to what
other
I've
weird things
found,
about the moon too. Oh, yeah.
yeah, there
Hmm.
there are other weird things about
The
the
moon
moon,
is
but
fucked up, but go on.
menacing.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Um,
So why does it ring like a bell? Well, did that, and then you can bring up the other fucked up things about the moon because that's
Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
interesting.
The
And
bell is weird though.
I
Hmm.
might be able to give some scientific data based off of what you say is weird about the moon. But the reason that it rings like a bell is because
Yeah.
there's no moisture on the moon.
Huh.
oh,
Oh, there's
cool.
no water.
Because
There's
if
no
you look at
oceans on the
sound,
moon.
well, if you look at
Yeah.
how sound waves move, if it's more humid in an area, sound moves slower because the
Mhm.
water is impeding it. The moisture in
Okay.
the air is impeding the sound because those are, water moisture molecules, gases in the air that are hitting the sound waves. And so the
Hmm.
sound waves tend to get dampened quicker. Earth
Hmm.
has a lot of water. Even deep in the earth, we have, in our
Hmm.
soil, we have a lot of moisture. And so
Hmm.
it stops sound much quicker. So if you have an earthquake, yeah, you can measure it and you can monitor it, but the sound waves will stop at a certain point because there's enough resistance from moisture on the earth to
Hmm.
be able to stop that sound. Whereas on the
Mm.
moon, there is no moisture there, so there's nothing to dampen the sound, so the sound just kind of bounces around until it naturally comes to its conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually like
And
that explanation. I haven't heard that explanation before for that, and yeah,
mhm.
sounds feasible.
if you think about
Yeah,
it, like if you were to
really.
explain this on the like absolute most basic terms, a lot of people can identify with going to like a swimming pool or a lake or a river to swim around. And if you put your head under the water and you try to listen for other sounds, you can hear people talking above the surface, but it's very muffled. And if even if you were to grab a speaker and play it under the water, it sounds weird. It sounds
Hmm.
distorted and like almost longer and more drawn out. And because this phenomenon is at play where the water is dampening the sound experience. So if
Yeah.
you think
So
about
the
how that works, then it all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, the water would totally dampen sound waves. um, but also something that was adding a little bit of a complication to this theory was the fact that the moon was found to be less dense than the earth, and that was
yeah.
already like popular information before NASA came out and said that the moon rang like a bell, which or a gong, as I had relayed in the original quote there. But it's said both ways very often, and it was actually, from what I read, like a case of mistaken information, because when NASA said it rang like a gong, they actually were not talking about its literal sound, and a lot of people took it literally to mean that it audibly rang like a real bell, or that they could hear something ringing out in space. But
Nope,
that's
nope, 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 nope.
Oh.
Sound
it's
does
moon.
not travel in space. If
So it
there
would just
is
be
an
sound
explosion
waves.
next to you, you will
Yeah.
not hear it if you're in
Okay.
space.
So it didn't ring like a gong or whatever. It just produced
No.
the waves, the sound
Yes.
waves, basically from that. They could like almost
Yes.
feel it. Like,
It
It
was a
was
feeling. It was what they would
okay.
the moon's equivalent of an earthquake, and they call it a moonquake, because
Okay,
it's on the
that
moon.
thank you. That makes a lot
Yeah.
more sense to me too, because I've read about well, yeah, I've heard it. I've heard that quote both ways, gong or bell. And especially with bell, it makes you think that there's a sound involved with this. But you're
Yeah.
right, Annette. There's not any sound in space.
right.
So they're not going to hear
Yeah.
anything. So,
No, and the
okay,
moon
this
doesn't
makes me
really
feel a
have
little
an
better about the moon.
atmosphere, so you
Yeah. Okay. So scientists don't know exactly how the moon got there, though, right? Isn't that still a mystery? Like, I know there's one theory it came from the Earth, I think, or like
That it was
came
originally
from outer
part of the earth.
space.
or that
Yeah, yeah.
it was a large celestial object that got caught in Earth's gravity, or
Yeah,
like
it's just like
yeah,
it's in a
Mhm.
very convenient spot where it is,
yeah.
like the distance between the moon and the earth and the earth and the sun. I don't know. It's like the moon and the sun, when we get an eclipse, they line up like perfectly. It's I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah,
wild,
and that's something that
even
Isaac
though they're different
Asimov
sizes.
was quoted as talking about when
Yeah.
he was, talking about the wonder that is the moon. He was quoted as saying something like how what a strange coincidence it is that the moon should be exactly the size to fit within the bounds of the sun when they're lined up like that. It could completely cover it, like so that ended up
Yeah.
leading to a lot of this belief too, and all these little teeny tiny either misunderstandings or pieces of genuine information that were taken out of context began to snowball and created this idea that the moon could potentially be hollow. And then, of course, the extension of that idea is, why would it be hollow? What's the
Mhm.
purpose of hollowness? Well, because it's
Yeah.
a constructed thing that was made by extraterrestrials as part of a spaceship or observatory. So,
Or maybe it's part of the soul trap. Ah.
maybe it is. And
Ah.
we've heard of that too. We discussed Soul Trap last time in our
Yeah.
previous episode, and there are people who believe that the moon is hollow and that it is part of the Soul Trap. It could be the soul warehouse we were speaking of, if you want to call it
The
that,
control
or
center.
the control
Yeah.
center. And of course, even more things were like even more pandemonium was assigned to was assigned to the moon. Excuse me, when they found those pictures of a supposed structure on the moon that looked like a
Oh,
the door.
like
and the
yeah.
face. And didn't they find a face on Mars too?
On
I
Mars,
can't
yeah.
remember. Yeah.
There's also a theory that Mars is hollow, by the way.
Oh. And there's a theory that the Earth is hollow.
Oh man.
Man, all
What?
these hollow
See,
planet theories.
we can't even help
do
ourselves.
people not understand how gravity works? Like,
Probably
do you
not.
not
Well,
understand the equations for gravity that make absolutely perfect sense based on the mass of the Earth? And if you calculate for what the Earth is made of, it creates the mass of the Earth, and that is
I'm
our force of gravity.
I'm
Like
gonna say
it
most
is.
people probably don't understand how gravity works because,
Oh, well, that's really sad.
I don't.
I mean, not so
Not
specifically.
exactly,
I
anyway.
mean, yeah, people understand you drop something, it falls. You trip, you fall. It's
Hmm.
gravity, right? Like it's a very
And it doesn't matter the
simplistic.
size of the object. Within a vacuum, everything will
Mm,
fall at the same speed on Earth. And
that's right.
it will fall at a different speed if you go to another planet because the force of gravity is different. Now, the force
Right.
of gravity between Venus and Earth is very, like, the size of the planets are approximate. Like, Venus is just slightly smaller than Earth, and Mars is quite smaller than Earth. So you have less gravitational force on Mars.
Hmm.
And this is all calculatable. Like, you can calculate this. And, if you believe in the moon landing, which I do because, science. And my grandpa, who worked for JPL and NASA, was very much in working on that project. So I don't understand these big conspiracy theories. Like, did we actually land on the moon? It is so difficult to contain a conspiracy. Like, you have to
Yeah.
control so many people's mouths and so many moving parts. Like, how is that even a thing?
Well,
Like,
you could argue that the conspiracy got out. It was leaked, but they're just doing damage control and trying to make those people look crazy, the people who
yeah, but
believe in it, even though it's the
Okay.
truth.
But
but the
why? That's
science.
what I always ask.
I don't know.
Why?
Power, control, money.
Like
Why does anyone do anything?
why would the United States government benefit from putting up such an elaborate hoax that
To
we
beat the
had
Soviets?
landed
Yeah,
on the
I was gonna
moon?
say to beat the Soviets would
Okay,
be.
yeah,
Uh,
we
I
we did
mean,
have that motivation.
that's pretty
But the
shallow, though.
science, the math,
Yeah.
the math and the science that they used to get to the moon have made technological advances in our society.
So
Microwaves,
why
things like
haven't we been
that.
going to the moon more often? I feel like we had all this
We
moon
lost
shit going on.
funding.
Oh.
America lost interest in it, and so we weren't. The NASA wasn't
Hmm.
being funded as heavily as they had been in the past. So,
All right.
but now we're going back to the moon, and
Yeah, and
Mhm.
India just went to the moon, right? I
yeah.
mean,
Well,
yeah,
we're sending astronauts back to the moon.
yeah, the United States. Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And we have
Which is
plans to
awesome.
send
Yeah.
astronauts to Mars too. So, but
Ooh.
you know,
Mhm.
with these kind of things, like even with the moon, if you're going to account for it to be a hollow structure, if you take into consideration, we do know the materials that the moon is made of. We don't know necessarily like what is in its core, perhaps, but
Yeah,
we do
that's
know
another
what
weird
the
thing.
moon is made of, and we can calculate out that mass, and that mass does equal the moon's gravitational force.
Mm-hmm.
So
The
to
science adds
me,
up, you're saying?
the science
Yeah.
adds up, and science isn't one of those things that you can just tweak a few numbers, because these principles are universally used. You
Mm-hmm.
can use them on any celestial object, and it will always come out the same. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about, you were saying, it's just in the perfect place. Well, the whole solar system is aligned basically approximately with the Fibonacci sequence. This sequence is something that exists everywhere. And
nature repeats it.
yeah.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember exactly what that
The
the statement for
Fibonacci
that theory.
sequence is
Yeah.
how everything doubles upon itself.
And is shaped like a
Yeah.
nautilus.
Yes.
Yeah, that thing. Okay. Yep.
Well, that's how, if you basically double the distance between one planet to the next, that's basically where they align.
Hmm.
So,
As above, so below.
yeah, and
Yep.
Earth. Yeah, how did Earth get a moon like that? Well, like Saturn has 80 something moons and Jupiter has like
How come we
60
only have
something
one?
moons.
What the
I
Well,
know
fuck?
yeah,
that.
I know,
I
and
feel
Mars
like
has two.
Lame.
I
But
know we
Mars is
got like
two.
shortchanged.
Yeah, Mars's two moons are like, I don't count those as moons. They're just floating rocks, man. They're not even circular. Like they're satellites, but I wouldn't call them a moon.
So
But
how
Don't
does
insult
okay,
them; they'll cry.
if the
I know.
moon if the moon came from outer space, let's say the moon came from somewhere else and just came into our orbit, how come it didn't just crash into the Earth?
Well, it's actually it's in a perfect spot to not fall into Earth. It's actually moving away from Earth at a steady rate. It is
Yeah.
leaving the Earth's atmosphere.
It's
So,
trying to get
Aw.
away from us.
yeah, well, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yes,
So
I
I
can
guess
make
we
The
better
moon's
humans.
like
get there
the moon's
and
like,
make
fuck
our
this.
moon station so
Mhm.
that the moon can then become a proper spaceship so that we can just ride it out into the sunset or whatever.
But if the moon
Yeehaw.
was a spaceship, and
Yeah.
they would need to stay in orbit and use boosters
Yeah.
and stuff, then why would they be floating away? Don't you think that if it would find like there would be abnormalities, whether
Hmm.
it's closer to the moon or like closer to the Earth or further away from the Earth, because you would be having to use boosters and
But isn't just gravity keeping it in place at this point?
well,
Like
yeah, I mean,
even if whether it's made by a species or it just floated here from somewhere or it came from out of the earth, at this point gravity's just keeping it where it is, right? But the moon is weird though. It doesn't like spin, right? You just see one side of it all the time.
mm,
Like what's up
yeah.
with that? That's not normal for things to do, right?
Well, why not?
I don't know. I thought everything spun when it was orbiting, but doesn't the moon just like stay kind of facing the same way all the
Mm-hmm.
time?
Well, if it stayed facing the
Am I
same way
wrong?
all the time, then wouldn't we see different sides of it because of how spinning works? So it would have to spin very slowly for us to
Yeah.
always see the same side of it.
I don't know. I'm not
It goes
explaining
around
this
and
very
around.
well, but I've just seen things about how the moon just doesn't act like other things in the solar system do. So,
But our solar system is just like one very minuscule part of a bigger
mhm.
galaxy, even.
Yeah.
And that galaxy is just a minuscule part of an even bigger universe. So the fact that something is a little different is, explainable. Like that's understandable
Mhm.
by statistics. You're not going to have everything behaving in the same way. And if you look at
Mhm.
why is the moon made of different material than Earth, well, so is Mars, and so is Venus, and then we have these gas giants, and so they're all
Mhm.
composed of different things.
There's lots of
Isn't
shit out
Uranus a
there.
gas giant?
Uranus is a gas giant.
That's right.
My
It
anus is
is.
Ew.
also a gas giant.
Your mom's Uranus. Yes.
But like,
Okay, so you have me feeling better about the moon. Like I feel like maybe it's just a moon.
but what are some other things you heard about the moon?
Oh, well, okay. Riddle me this. I've heard that what is the term? Mantle, the crust of the moon is very hard and it's weird because when asteroids hit it, this is just what I've heard. I can't quote anything right now, but like they don't go super deep. It's like they make these wide, shallow craters, almost like underneath that moon dust is a very hard, maybe metal layer of a spaceship hiding under a bunch of moon dust. It's just weird how, and then again, going with the ringing of the gong, like it's a very dense layer, but then they're saying that the moon isn't dense on the inside. So what the fuck, yo?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. Yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
difference between a moon crater and an Earth crater? Like if you look at the Earth's,
Well, I don't know. See,
the craters are pretty big on.
This is where I should have some research to come in and bring, or it's just what I've seen talked about before online, though, is that the craters are weird and they don't seem to go very deep. And so it's almost like we just can't get very deep on the moon. Like
Right.
I wonder how far we've been able
that
to
too.
drill. Really?
Okay. I've seen those, yeah, that discussion, like when I was doing research to figure out exactly where this conspiracy theory came from, because I got curious. I was like, well, where the heck did this idea come from that the moon is hollow? Because until you had mentioned it, I hadn't considered that the moon could be hollow. And
new theory for me too.
Yeah, it was totally new. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
It was almost like saying the moon was cheese to me. And I was like,
Oh,
huh.
yeah.
And then, so I got curious about where it came from and ended up, of course, once again on Reddit, and saw people talking about how the craters are supposedly much more shallow than impact craters here on Earth. And they spread out a lot wider from the center, from the impact site, as if there's something hard underneath all of that.
Well, I think that I feel like they would spread out more just based off of the atmospheric conditions of Earth versus the moon.
And the fact that there's, again, no moisture there.
Yeah, that too. Like that's actually really interesting, and I want to know what the size difference between the moon and Earth craters and craters on Mars. Take it even further, because we can look at those too.
Other planets. What's it look like?
Other planets get hit by asteroids all the time.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
just odd.
Is that a universal thing, or is that something that is really weird? Only the moon does that. That would be some interesting data. If anybody has any data on that, drop it in. Drop us an email, because I'd love to see that. But I don't feel like the craters on Earth are very deep either, and I feel like they would be more spread out on the moon, because when an asteroid is entering the Earth's atmosphere, or a comet, well, comets don't enter the Earth's atmosphere. Don't listen to me. I'm hungover. But I am hungover today. But
so an asteroid. So you said an asteroid. If an asteroid enters the atmosphere,
if something comes into the Earth's atmosphere, then you're getting resistance from the Earth's atmosphere, which will burn it up. So it'll reduce in size coming into the Earth's atmosphere, making the impact less than it would be if you had no atmosphere via the moon.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah.
If the moon doesn't have, that's an explosion pattern that also has, there's air that is, there's a reaction with air, and maybe that increases it. I don't know. I have to look at I would have to look at impacts on, in a vacuum versus in air. But I feel like if you, that's an experiment that probably has been done. And I would assume that would be why it would be more spread out, is because there's less air resistance. And if something hits and it doesn't have an explosionary, if it doesn't have an explosionary reaction because it's not interacting with air molecules, then perhaps it wouldn't go as deep. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Either
But
that
the
or, the moisture making like, like a muddy kind of consistency. Maybe it's easier to displace something like that with with an impact. I don't know.
Yeah.
that's a good point too. Yeah.
But what do you
Well,
guys think about the idea? Because like when I was doing this research, I was just like, I actually did my research because I hate this theory so much, and I love it too. Uh, yeah, don't mess with space. That's my
yeah,
jam.
yeah,
And
that is your jam.
but it was interesting that people pointed out that in ancient lore and in art and some other things that are from ancient times, the moon is not found to exist in those works of
Yes.
art.
Thank you. I
Oh,
wanted to
So
mention
yeah.
that
I
earlier
what
and
do you
I
forgot
guys
forgot.
think
about
about
that
that?
too.
Yeah, what do you
Yes.
Oh
guys
my
think about
gosh.
that?
Just
Yeah,
because it's
that
not mentioned to exist doesn't mean it didn't exist. I mean, just because it didn't occur in a story or a poem or whatever doesn't mean that it wasn't there. It just could mean that it was so like they took it for granted because that's the only light that they had in the sky. It was always there except when there was a new moon and obviously it wouldn't be shining and they could see the
Mm-hmm.
stars way better than we could today with all of our light pollution. So they would have been way more intimately familiar with the moon and stars and all of those, how all of those were presented from the Earth's surface because of the simple fact of light pollution. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just because it doesn't
Yeah.
get featured in stories doesn't mean that it didn't exist.
But isn't there an ancient story carved on some temple that is a story of how the moon came to be? Like when the moon was added to the sky? I feel like I saw something about
In
that
Egypt,
too. Maybe that was it. I don't know.
I
There was some ancient thing, but it's like, maybe we're misinterpreting it. Who knows? It's
Well,
just
well, what about
interesting.
from a
what
storytelling and historical perspective, and this is actually quite explainable because when you're talking about the history of storytelling, one thing that you know is that um, people from ancient cultures or very old cultures even um, they had certain methods of storytelling and things like fables were employed.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how the
Yeah,
moon came to be could have been a story that was told to children to simply explain why it was there. Kind of like
that's
how,
true.
how the zebra got its stripes, how the giraffe got its spots, how the sun came into being, how the earth came into
Mm-hmm.
being. I mean, we have whole religions that revolve around these stories about how all of these celestial objects and animals and people came into being. And a lot of us can identify, like if you were to read Rudyard Kipling and started dissecting whether you thought his stories were true or false and whether or not animals could talk, you'd probably come to the conclusion pretty quickly that all of those are literary devices, that they're all metaphorical, that they're being employed to tell a bigger story about how the world works. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where I think this is really where we get conspiracy theories is when the literalists walk into the room and they take something super literally, like they do. And
Mm.
then, they're like, well, this has to be how it is. And then they employ black and white thinking to say it has to be this way because this one thing said this one thing. And then they don't want to consider anything else. Um,
Yeah. I mean, all
but
we know is what we're told. And so
Yeah. I
all
was
it takes
actually
is.
super, super excited when I found out that the origin of this was H.G. Wells. And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yes, maybe someday I could write a novel that will then be taken literally and turn into a conspiracy theory and I'll be famous
Yes.
forever. Yay. It's
Yeah.
every
Good old
writer's dream.
HG.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
H.G.
right.
Wells is great.
Right. So I was actually super excited about that and had a good laugh about it. And,
That's true, though. I mean, there are fantastic stories, and we humans choose to take a little kernel of that and run with it and say, "Oh, this must be the truth," or just our memories are one of these episodes, we have to talk about the Mandela effect, about
Oh,
people
yeah.
misremembering things, because that fascinates me so much.
Me too. As
Mhm.
I studied psychology, and that absolutely fascinates me.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh, I could go on for
Yeah,
that. But anyway,
we'll have to do
but
that.
but yeah, it's like maybe one of these ancient cultures came up with a crazy story about the moon, and then it just stuck. And now we're looking back at these hieroglyphics and carvings and going, "Oh, this is what they really believed." But it's like maybe it was just some story that the head of the tribe made up and told everyone, and they were like, "Well, we trust this guy because he's
Yeah.
our leader."
It
And
could have been a poem, an ancient poem,
or yeah,
because not all poetry
exactly.
rhymes. Not all poetry has a meter or, a turn of verse that's
Mm-hmm.
consistent. So we tend, as Westerners, would tend to think that poetry might need to rhyme or have a certain meter associated with it, but that's actually not true. And there are many cultures who, thought of poetry as something that was just very beautiful words, and
Mm-hmm.
unexpected phrasings, and maybe things that were magical or mysterious inside of it,
Yeah.
like it just wasn't what we think it is today. And I think
Could
that's
all be
another
stories.
thing is time. It passes and ideas come and go, and we do forget because of the, like, Mandela effect. Like, we forget about
Mm-hmm.
things. And we do this collectively as a species. So, things that are lost to time, that might have been either a story or an instance of poetry, gets taken literally thousands of years later when it's unearthed. It's
I mean,
just
okay, but
it's
going
kind of
back to the
funny.
moon though, there's no denying though that the moon has like an effect on us, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
on Earth, on the oceans, on even, I mean, what does science say about the moon having an effect on people? You hear like, oh, ERs are more full on full moons because there's more accidents
Yeah,
happening,
that's
or just more crazy
absolutely,
shit happens. Yeah, so that's
That's
like,
yeah,
true.
that's
real,
factual
right?
data. That's factual
Yeah.
data.
So
There
that's
are more car
interesting.
accidents and more people in the ER
Mm-hmm.
statistically on full moons, during full moons.
The moon's
That
fucking with
is,
us.
there's also hormonal behaviors in the brain that, yeah, change based on,
Is that because humans are mostly made of water and the moon is affecting the water down here? Like it
well,
infects the
okay,
ocean?
so I don't know. I don't know that that's a thing, because whether or
Hmm.
not the Earth's shadow is covering part of the moon
Yeah.
doesn't change the force that the moon has on Earth. It's
Yeah.
just how much of the moon you see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So for saying like the full moon idea, um I feel like that's more of a psychological thing than anything else. Um but with regards to, how the moon affects us, I mean, the tides are created because of the moon. The earth, the gravitational pull from the moon moves the earth's crust. So the earth is not like a perfect circular ball. It's always elongated towards the moon. And as the
Hmm.
moon moves, the earth pull of the earth moves as well. So we are
Hmm.
always slightly elongated towards the moon because of the gravitational pull.
Hmm. Interesting.
So
So I
it
wonder
is a
if that's a
force.
simple, like, matter of balance. So if you're, elongated in a certain direction, and I don't know, maybe you're, I have no idea. My brain just, I
Yeah.
crapped out
Hmm.
half of a theory, thought better of it after I opened my mouth, and now I'm like, you know what? No. No.
Awesome.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah, but I mean, there's no denying that, because we can feel the force of gravity, we could, we see evidence of the force of gravity, and, the pull of the earth here. I mean, we're not like, the earth is moving very fast and we're not flying off of it for some reason. So,
yeah, that's also weird.
no, it really isn't, but
New
Really is there.
conspiracy
You say
theory.
so.
Well, yeah, because that's no. You just have to look at like space as a sheet or a blanket, and if you put a heavier object on it, everything that's near the object goes with the object. So the Earth is so much bigger than us that
Yeah.
we are just pulled into its gravitational pull because we weigh nothing
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
comparison.
Okay.
So it makes total sense. Like that's not
Yeah.
and space doesn't have an up and a down and a right and a left. So like
Mm-hmm.
you just those kind of ideas you just have to be comfortable with. and but it's
Right.
absolutely explainable. But because you can feel the force of gravity on the Earth and the moon has you can verify and test that it has a gravitational pull toward on the Earth. They have
Mm-hmm.
they work together, and the Earth is pulling the moon is pulling the Earth.
Mm.
There's nothing to say that that force does not have some kind of effect on humans or life on Earth, because it is a force and we know it's there.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
maybe it's hard for us to even understand exactly what the impact is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, things on Earth do tend to move in a lunar cycle, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just factual. But you know, there's nothing saying that the moon like came to the Earth or the moon came from the Earth. It could have just been formed from materials that were not quite in the Earth's gravitational field. How were the
Mm.
planets made? The planets were made by materials coming together, gases coming together and forming, and circling, and that's how everything was formed. And so
Mm-hmm.
the moon is sitting in this perfect place where it's not necessarily being it's not being pulled towards Earth, and it's slowly moving away from Earth, but that's just where those materials just happen to come together and form a moon.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
possible. And now that we're, getting into the real like nitty-gritty scientific facts that, that
I
drive
prefer
everything.
garbage science, but
Oh, I love garbage science. It's
I know
so
you
fun.
do.
Mm-hmm.
Garbage science is so fun. I will never, ever, ever say that conspiracy theories are completely worthless, because they're great entertainment, and entertainment is worth something.
Oh yeah.
So it's wonderful, and I love them for their storytelling. But like, when I'm sitting here hearing all this hardcore science, I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. How many people have actually been to the moon? Not very many of us,
Mm.
right? Only a
Mm-hmm.
small handful of people.
Well, it
And
takes a
how
lot
many,
to get to the moon.
so if we extend that boundary, how many people have been sitting around in NASA's control center or other control centers when, there were launches? Well, more people
Mm-hmm.
then. That's a wider pool of people. So
Yeah.
it's still not big, though. We're still
Mm-hmm.
talking like in the low thousands of people. We're not maybe
Yeah.
even the hundreds, still.
Mm-hmm.
And um so if we're talking about the majority of even just American society from the early 1900s forward in time to today, that's a whole lot of people that have missed out on witnessing what has actually happened when scientists and astronauts landed on the moon or went on other space journeys or were sitting around in a control room watching it all happen remotely. I mean, not a lot of us are privy to this information. And then if you extend the idea of privilege, you understand that not everybody has gotten to learn about it in college either. They don't teach this stuff in high school. They don't teach it in middle school. They don't teach it in elementary school. They teach it in college. And how many people can afford to go to college? Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
also, it's more than there were before, right? But it's not everybody. And when
Yeah.
you're sitting around, when the best that you could have was a middle school or high school education, a lot of these more simplistic views of, a hollow moon, they seem plausible because the, scientific principles, we'll call them, were, they were very easy to grasp. They were stated in plain English from the beginning. People could understand them, and because people had very basic knowledge about things like gravity and how the moon might work, and the fact that it's up in space and that we can't see all but one side of it, like, if that's all the information you're working with, then literally anything is possible, even a hollow moon. So this is very much a story of privilege versus
Yeah,
not
that's a
privilege.
fair point.
Like,
Yeah.
so
Very few people will be able to witness this themselves. And then we just have to
yeah.
trust that the scientists, what they're giving us is what they say it is.
And what's harder for a conspiracy theorist than trust? Right? What's
Yeah.
harder? Literally,
Mm-hmm.
they're not a
Yeah.
trusting bunch.
Well, I don't
No.
think that scientists are necessarily trusting bunches either. It's just that
That's a good point.
scientists, yeah, you're taught to question everything. I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have
True.
you ever written a scientific research paper? They suck because, but you have to be open to that discourse, and that's what science is, I have this discovery, then people come together to try to bash your
Mm-hmm.
discovery and disprove it, like that's
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
or prove it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not that you take that personally, it's all in the pursuit of what is the actual truth. And
Right.
so
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't, in that way, I don't think conspiracy theorists and scientists think all that differently.
Yeah.
You're right about you know what, that is correct. They don't think super differently. I think the real difference is that scientists are open to changing their minds if facts are presented that, that disprove their original theory. Whereas people, everyday people, we're taught to just get along and be polite to other people, and having an argument about somebody's beliefs out in public, especially if we don't know them, is frowned upon. It's considered impolite to do, you know. So if somebody
Mm-hmm.
comes up to you and they're like, I believe that the flying spaghetti monster is absolutely the god of this world, and he is 100% real in his
Nice.
gluteniness or whatever, like,
Mm.
you can't, like, by the rules of our culture, you can't be like, what, that's actually not true, and I'll tell you why. Like, it's something that's frowned upon to do. The more polite thing to do, according to American culture, would be like, oh, really? Well, that's an interesting belief. And then just change the subject if you're
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable with it, like, it's
Unless
less
Yeah.
you're
passive
on
aggressive.
Twitter.
Yeah,
Unless
unless
you're
you're on
on
Twitter.
Twitter.
Oh
And
yeah.
oh,
In
no, what, I
sorry, yeah.
refuse to call it X. Fuck you, Elon. Fuck you. Um, I,
Oh,
I
Twitter is its dead name.
Twitter.
But
I'm
Its
going to
dead name.
continue dead naming it.
but no,
This
that's a
is the
good point
only
though.
thing I will dead name.
Yes. In person, when you're talking, you can't just talk about this shit with anybody in person. And then if you
No.
talk about it online, everyone is so polarized. You're not going to have a constructive conversation about it. Scientists
Hmm.
and conspiracy theorists are never going to get along in the same forum. They just fight each other,
Well, I wonder about that, because I wonder if do you think that there's been a rise in belief in conspiracy theories because of social media and the internet, or
You know what?
has it always been? Like,
I
what do you
just saw
think?
something about this the other day, and the conclusion was that no, there are not more conspiracy theories now. I think they're just spread around a lot more. The
More
information
people have
travels
heard of
faster.
them.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Which
Yeah.
makes
But
sense.
yeah, but I mean,
We've always looked for ways to explain things, but yeah, it wasn't until the internet was invented and we could just get information around within seconds that you can really spread the shit.
Right. Yeah. All it takes is just a few seconds for people to read a post that you've written online about some conspiracy theory. And you could have made it up out of thin air and people would be
Oh
like,
yeah.
whoa, really? Oh my God. Like, because they just don't question what they're reading in the way that they should,
Yes. And
in
sadly,
light
you
of
can't believe
social media.
anything you read online. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't, you just don't know who to trust online. It sucks.
Right. It does kind of suck. And I feel like we're also operating with a whole lack of empathy on the subject when we talk about conspiracy theorists and conspiracy theories, not taking into account, that certain demographics of people, overwhelmingly, impoverished people, are going to be more likely to believe in those things. And I mean, that's not exactly their fault. They tried, they did the best they could with what they had. And I don't think it's anybody's place to be super, super mean to them, except the flat earthers, and that's it.
Yeah. Fuck those guys. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
But but so in that way, would you say that conspiracy theories can be comparative to like religion, in that, the less educated you tend to be, the more you tend to subscribe to those ideals?
That's possible, but and also, some like little sects of these beliefs, they kind of do operate on a more spiritual level, and in fact spirituality becomes entwined in a lot of this stuff, kind of like hollow moon theory being
Yeah,
intertwined with collective consciousness, which being
Right.
that's
because it's a moon
Bingo.
trap.
intertwined.
It's a soul
Yeah.
trap,
Yeah,
isn't
soul
it? The
trap.
Right.
moon.
Mm-hmm.
The moon
Soul
is a
trap.
space station that is it's a soul trap.
You heard it
Exactly.
here,
So,
folks.
yep, you heard it
Yeah.
here.
That's what some people think, that the moon is like the control center for the
If that was
soul
true,
trap, the net. Yeah.
wouldn't there be a way to measure energy leaving the earth and going towards the moon?
What if it's a
Well, we
special kind of
can't.
energy we've never
Yes,
heard
that's
of?
what I'm saying. We can't see everything. We can't see all the dimensions. When a soul leaves a person's body, if a soul exists, like, we can't really measure that, even though, didn't we talk about how your weight goes down by a little bit after you die? But, so maybe
Yeah.
theoretically the soul has a weight. But yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can't see. If you move your arm and create a little bit of wind, that's like an energy wave right there, right? Like, you could knock something over with that force,
I'm
but
sure
you
that
can't
there
see
are.
it.
Well, but you have there's technology that can measure that.
Well, yeah, that's true, but
Yeah.
That's why we have
maybe.
sensors, and
Yeah, but we
the
can't
James
measure.
Webb Space Telescope has
I
so
know,
Ah.
many of those cool things on it.
that thing
And
is
now
sick.
we're looking far into space. And
Yeah,
I
but can we look at
have a hard
consciousness?
on for
Yeah.
the James Webb Space Telescope. I am in love with the James Webb Space Telescope.
You need to get in a room alone with the
I
telescope. Just 10
Yes.
minutes. Yeah.
10
I
minutes,
would
just
do
10 minutes.
naughty things to the James Webb Space
We
Telescope.
can't measure what's going on past what we just can observe with our human eyes. And
You
I
know
guess
what?
machines that
You know what I've
teleconfirmation.
just realized? I think this is a freaking conspiracy. We had a whole sex talk on our other podcast, Basel Tov, and Annette the entire time was like, I don't want to be talking about this. If I had pearls, I would clutch them right here. And here she
Oh, that's
is
because it's
talking about the
actual.
James Webb Telescope in very inappropriate and naughty terms, Annette.
That's how much she loves
Be-
space.
Yeah.
because that's not possible for me to do. So it's that's just theoretical.
All
Okay.
right,
If
fine.
you're talking about my actual personal life, we don't
Fair
go
enough.
there.
I'll
Fair
just have
enough.
to
Yes.
write an erotica about Annette and the James Webb Telescope and make it
Oh,
real.
There you go. Put it on the blog.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, I hope
You
that
know
we
what?
continue.
Patreon subscribers, they get a copy.
Oh, yes.
Oh Lord. Yeah, somebody plug that into an AI image creator, image to text.
There you go. Yes.
God, that would be
Oh, man.
insane.
How
Seriously.
big is that? How big is the telescope?
Oh, it's huge. It's massive.
Oh,
It's
okay.
absolutely massive.
Wow,
Like,
I'm sure it
wow.
is.
yeah,
Mhm.
they had to fold it up and put it into the payload of a spaceship to get it into space, and then it had to like mechanically unfold and unravel. It
Oh, wow.
is the
Whoa.
coolest thing in engineering I've ever seen. And if you get a chance to watch how did the James Webb Space Telescope like unravel in space, it's
Mhm.
so cool. Okay.
Do it.
Like,
Nerd alert.
I know,
Super
I'm
cool.
sorry, but
I
like
love
No,
it.
it's so
it's
I
cool.
okay.
love it.
Yeah,
We
but
all have our
like,
nerdy place.
Mhm. Yep.
yes, but I
But,
believe in the James Webb Space Telescope. I don't believe that the moon is
mhm.
hollow, and I I
I
fail to
believe
see any evidence that would even make me go, ah, with that whole theory
I'm
for
still
me.
open to the idea. I feel like the moon is weird and fucked up and we don't understand it completely. And so if
That's
there's
fair.
reptilian beings controlling it from the
Understand it.
inside, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, so
But if
I mean,
that was the criteria for believing in something, I mean, we don't even understand our own brains yet. Like,
oh,
the
I
brain
know.
is
That's
still
the thing.
very.
That's the thing. We don't know shit. Humans don't. We think we're so smart. I mean, we
yeah.
are, but there's so much we don't understand. So all we can do is talk about it. Try to
Yeah.
figure it out
And
together.
see, and I think the common thread that happens in stuff where, people hear it and they're like, "Oh, a conspiracy theory." Like, those stories that people hear and immediately their reaction is to roll their eyes or make some kind of horrible sound like, "Oh," or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So those stories all have something in common, and that is a pretty glaring lack of real hard scientific data associated with them. There
How
are
Mm.
other conspiracy theories though that do have little bits and pieces of real data, and that is really interesting, and then it becomes a little more confounding because it's all the more plausible once you get a
Mm-hmm.
few pieces of hard data. But the hollow moon theory has absolutely no scientific data that I could find that's like real, reasonable, reliable data. I and even Wikipedia says that there is no scientific data supporting the hollow moon or spaceship moon theory.
But maybe
It's
that's the conspiracy.
that is the
Oh, that's
conspiracy.
what
It
they
has been
want you to
covered
think.
up. It's a
Mm-hmm.
giant cover up, people. It's because the United States government and NATO and everybody else knows, all those governments, the one world government knows
Mm-hmm.
that the moon is hollow and that it's being piloted around by extraterrestrials, and they're in on it, and they're helping us. They're helping them mind control us, which is why everybody gets in car crashes on the full moon. And
Totally.
that is just a thing, guys.
All of the world leaders they're just reptilians in disguise.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Some of their
Yeah.
masks are starting to peel off, I think. Have you seen Joe Biden's
Uh-oh.
face lately? Oh.
Ugh.
I think it's possible he had like a mini stroke or something, and they've been
Oh.
pumping his face with prednisone. It
Oh
looks like
Oh.
God.
prednisone
Poor
Just
face
tell
to
guy.
me,
us
but
then.
I know. Sometimes I wish that, that our general public could be understanding enough that we could have that level of transparency, but
Yeah, probably
I
not.
know that the
We
assumption
can't
is
handle it.
that that's not going to be a thing, so then they cover it up, which only adds to the level of distrust. It's just a terrible cycle.
well, and
It
that's
is.
even with conspiracy theories. Like the part of conspiracy theories and why they exist is because every single one, even the stupid flat Earth, okay, they have just a grain of something that's true
Mm-hmm.
enough to
Mhm.
make you go,
That
oh.
could be
Hmm.
right. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
know. That's
And
the thing.
unless you have a very curious scientific mind, you're not going to go out and really think about,
Yeah.
how some of these. So that's going back to saying, if the less educated you are, the more
It's always
likely
good to,
you probably
yeah,
are to
like,
believe.
I love going down these conspiracy theory rabbit holes and I love
Hmm.
reading about them. And sometimes I do get kind of wrapped up in them and I'm thinking, I'm starting to question, something that I thought I knew. But it's good to go out and try to disprove those theories,
Yeah,
I mean, that's why we're talking about this shit here,
or
so that we
prove them.
can get, yeah,
Yeah,
or
or
proof.
prove them. Yeah,
Ah,
maybe
yeah,
it's
Bring
right.
it.
just talk about it. Yeah,
I
yeah,
Yeah.
am
good to get it out in the
I
light.
am so open to
Mhm.
people bringing evidence or bringing facts to me that I can sit there and go, okay,
Yeah,
that's a
like,
valid
huh, could
point.
be.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
I
Hmm.
that's part of, Ellen's coming from it from a very like spiritual and creative kind of side. She tends to, really, look at these things as, oh, it could be true.
I
And
get
like,
excited.
yeah, and
Hmm. Yeah.
that's the creativity side. And I come
Mhm.
from it, I'm very, very, very logically minded, and
Yep.
you would say left brained, but that's actually not a thing. So
Mm.
Hmm.
but I tend to be more logical than, expressive and creative and believing and those kind of things.
Mhm.
But you know both of those things, if we didn't have the creativity, because a lot of these conspiracy theories, they're
They're
made,
creative.
they're creative. And if we didn't have that creativity, then certain pieces and parts of science wouldn't even move forward,
Yeah.
That's
because
true. That's a good point.
there's a lot of scientific and technological advancements that are
Mhm.
inspired by science fiction and
Hmm.
inspired
Yeah.
by creative works. And so,
Yeah.
it takes a creative mind to be able to think of something that's new and different. And
Hmm.
and I very much applaud and admire that about people. But
Mhm.
on the other side, we take the inspiration and then we go, okay, well, how do we make this work? Is it possible? And I
Mhm.
Hmm.
tend to come from more of that side of
Yeah.
the fence.
Because I mean, some of the theories that we know and hold today as scientific facts were once thought of as crazy theories.
Oh,
Everyone used
yeah.
to think that the Earth was the center of the universe, and if you thought
Yeah.
otherwise, then you were going to be burned at the stake. Like
You're a
Yeah.
witch.
heretic. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
But I mean, the
speaking of
difference
a flat earth,
now.
that's actually a really old theory, and you would have been like
Oh,
a heretic if you had said that the earth was round.
Right?
oh, right. Round
Yeah,
earthers would
you
have been
fall off the
killed.
map.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Don't sail too
Exactly.
far, you'll fall off the map.
But I guess the
Yeah.
difference now is that we have the technology and we have more knowledge now. We know so much more than we did back then
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
those theories. But it's almost like we know too much now, and then we get in our own way and make up all these crazy theories.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the creative aspect, it's all a balancing act. Like I kind of embody both sides of this with logic and creativity. So I can, like, I'm the classic fence sitter that sits on the top of the fence and looks down into both yards. And
Mm-hmm.
I use that to my advantage if I'm telling a story. And because of that, I can recognize storytelling when I see it. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why it's hard for me to subscribe to religions and subscribe to, systems of belief or conspiracy theories. And some of them will interest me a great deal. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, this could explain things. And I'll get all excited about it and then be like, oh, it's just not logically lining up, and
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to have that balance, because if I had no logic, I could easily see myself just being like, I totally believe that, whatever religion is the truth, like I could
Mm-hmm.
see myself
Yeah, and not
subscribing.
question it. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that, like, out there in society, any society, it's important for the creatives and the scientific community to, have that meeting of the minds and, be the checks and balances for each other. Because,
Mm-hmm.
nothing but hard logic leaves little room for creativity and new ideas. And nothing but creativity leaves little room for logic and real plausible stories, like, so there
That's
just
right.
has to be a balance in everything.
Yep.
Yeah, for me,
Balance is good.
yeah, for me, balance, definitely balance is a thing, and I very much appreciate the creative. But
Mhm.
things like the moon being hollow, I mean, there's a lot of science behind that disprove that. Theories that I would sit there and I would question more would be things like the Loch Ness monster or Bigfoot, because is it possible that
Mhm.
there's a species that exists on Earth that, we
That we
haven't
don't
been
know
able
about?
to, yeah, that we don't
Mm-hmm.
know about? Well, it happens all the time. Like we
Yeah.
do find new species. And so for
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
me, those are a little bit more like, hmm,
Mm-hmm.
then
Yeah.
but with the moon being hollow, I'm gonna just put my stamp on no.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
as the
Well,
skeptic, hard
hopefully we'll
no.
find out
No.
someday for sure when we carve it open.
Yeah, when we
moon
get a
moon
giant
moon
celestial
mining.
knife, we just get a big bread knife and we saw it
We,
in half and then we can
yeah.
see, or we get
Mm-hmm.
a big hammer and we clunk it on the head and be like, "Hey, look, the middle of the
Core
jawbreaker
samples.
is
Yeah.
red." Like,
Mm-hmm. There
Just
you
take core
go.
samples.
yeah.
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 Yeah,
Yeah.
We
exactly.
need to know.
Yeah, inquiring minds want to know. Hollow moon theorists really want to know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
So,
yeah, so this
So what
has
do you
been a
think,
really
Ellen? What is
interesting.
your conclusion?
well, I think I kind of already said what I was thinking, but just believe that the moon is weird and we'll never truly know everything about it. And so I just feel like there's some strangeness to it. Is it
So you're 1 foot in, one
hollow?
foot out?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something weird about the moon. I don't know if it's hollow though, but if someone told me yes, it definitely is, wouldn't completely surprise me.
Yeah. I I like it as a story. I really do. I think it's amazing. Like, I think it's
It's a cool
awesome
story.
that, an author in 1901 could troll us even now. It's like really cool. Um,
Nice job,
I
HG.
Nice job. Yep.
Yeah.
I just don't I don't know if it's possible for the moon to be hollow for so many reasons. I would be absolutely open, like Annette said, to real scientific data that could point to the moon being hollow or some kind of a construct, because is it possible? Yes,
Hmm.
many things are possible. Is it plausible though? Well, no, not really with the set of data that we're currently working with. It's not really that
Mm.
plausible.
But you're
It's
saying there's a chance.
There's a chance that that we are
Hmm.
all quite mistaken and that this thing is some kind of a spy ship or whatever.
Hmm.
But I don't think that it
Occam's
is based
razor.
on what I know.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
the Death Star. Mm.
The
It's no
Death
moon.
Star. That is
That's a
Ah,
space
that's
station.
no moon.
Exactly.
Oh,
I mean, I think people just kind of, if they can't explain something, they go for what they can explain and then kind of start comparing it to other things they think they know very well. And, you know, that's how these things come about. But I really doubt that the moon is hollow at this time. I mean, prove me wrong. Go ahead, prove me wrong. Like, do
hmm.
it. I
Let
welcome
us
it.
know what you think, listeners. We want to know. We
Yeah.
want to know your opinion.
If you're sitting around on YouTube watching, go ahead and fill in your opinion or your facts and links and stuff like that. We'll definitely go look at them.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be horribly wrong here.
Ooh, and give us a like too if you'd like.
Oh yeah, that
Like and
too.
subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Smash that like button.
Oh my God, I know, right? Like, is there any way to get somebody to like your video without saying smash that subscribe button or hit the
I
bell
think
or whatever? Like, is
hmm
there any way to really do it?
had to do it.
Yeah.
Yep. But thank you for listening, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to all of our information and our ideas and the reasons that we are thinking one way or the other. There's a lot out there to know and also not to know. And, we'd be absolutely insane if we were all saying that we knew everything, which is why these conspiracy theories start in the first place, because people don't know something that they want to know, and then they try to fill in the blank and then just say, refuse to say that they don't know. So yeah, it's always interesting to see what the mind comes up with when faced with a giant question mark. So thank you for listening to this giant question mark, and we'll be back next time with another big old question mark to dissect here on Sage, Skeptic, and Storyteller.
Bye.
Bye.